Her lover showed up at my house to prove his dominance, but he never left. Imagine discovering your wife has been secretly betraying you for months. But the shock doesn't stop there. This story isn't just about infidelity, it's about the moment everything falls apart, and the shocking revelation that turns a man's life upside down. Will he confront the truth, or let it destroy him? Stick around to find out how this intense journey unfolds, and what happens when the truth finally comes crashing down. It was a cold morning when I first started to notice the subtle changes. My name is Finn Hayes, and for the past 10 years, I had built a life that I thought was rock solid. A marriage with Serafina Sarah, as I called her, was everything I could have asked for. We were a power couple in our own way, balancing the intricacies of work and life, and making it look effortless. She was a rising star in the fashion world, a talented and driven woman whose every move seemed to command attention. I, on the other hand, had built my career as an architect, pouring my soul into the spaces I created. Steady and dependable. For years, it was a rhythm we'd gotten used to, like a song that you don't need to think about. It just flows. But somewhere along the line, that song began to change. At first, the signs were so small, so insignificant, that I brushed them off. She started staying late at the office more often, always claiming she had deadlines. I had no reason to doubt her. She worked hard, always had. But then, the late nights turned into entire weekends spent away. I'd call her to check in, and her voice always sounded rushed, too busy. "I'm just finishing up a few things, Finn. I'll be home soon," she'd say, her tone dismissive yet friendly. And I'd tell myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, she was Sarah, she could handle it all. I was the steady one, the one who didn't need much attention. But the distance between us started growing. It wasn't just the time apart. It was the little things, the way she started dressing. A sudden shift in her wardrobe choices, something I hadn't expected. Dresses that hugged her body in ways they never had before. Clothes that screamed of high-powered meetings. Not the laid-back office environment she always talked about. "You look amazing tonight," I said once, catching her in one of those outfits. She smiled, but it didn't feel like the genuine smile I knew. "It's just for a meeting," she said, brushing off my compliment, like it was nothing. I wanted to believe it, but something in the back of my mind told me this wasn't about work. It was something more, something darker. I tried to convince myself that I was just being overly sensitive. Sarah was always confident, always beautiful, and I loved her for that. It wasn't unusual for people to be drawn to her. She had that magnetic energy. I admired that about her. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift between us. We barely spoke anymore. The laughter we once shared was replaced by awkward silences. We didn't have date nights anymore, hell. We didn't even have dinner together most nights. She'd get home late, eat something quickly, and retreat to her office or bedroom. The glow of her phone lighting up the dark like some distant star. That's when I first heard about him. His name was Kellen Rhodes. At first, it seemed harmless. Just another colleague she mentioned in passing. But as time went on, his name started popping up more and more. Kellen did this. Kellen said that. Kellen had this amazing idea. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just a coworker, someone she admired for his work ethic, someone she worked closely with. But then I started to notice something strange. The way she spoke about him wasn't just professional. There was an undertone, a certain admiration in her voice. She seemed captivated by him. "He's just a coworker, Finn," she'd say, rolling her eyes whenever I teased her about how much she talked about him. "Don't be ridiculous." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just that he was in her stories so much, it was the way she lit up when she talked about him. Her eyes, the way they sparkled when she said his name. The soft laugh that followed her words. And then came the late-night team dinners. They started becoming a regular thing. I'd ask about them, and she'd brush me off. "Just the usual office crowd," she'd say, never giving me more details. The more I tried to push, the more distant she became, shutting me out with every excuse. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved, the woman I had spent years building a life with, could be slipping away from me. But my mind wouldn't stop. The little things, the late nights, the changes in her behavior started adding up. I couldn't ignore them anymore. One night, after she came home from another team dinner, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what was really going on. I found myself sitting in our living room, my heart pounding as I stared at her laptop. She had left it open, just sitting there on the coffee table, as if she didn't care. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let go. I opened the laptop, telling myself I was just checking the calendar for an event we had coming up. But as soon as the screen lit up, my eyes locked onto something I hadn't expected. An unread email. From Kellen. The subject line was short, but it made my stomach drop. About last night. My hand hovered over the mouse, the tension in the air thick, suffocating. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew it would cross a line, but my curiosity was eating at me. I clicked it open, heart hammering in my chest. The email wasn't explicit, but the tone, God, the tone was enough to make my blood run cold. The casual references to moments shared that didn't feel like something a colleague should share. There was laughter, inside jokes, little private moments that had no place in their work relationship. It was everything I needed to see to know the truth. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, the weight of what I had just uncovered pressing down on me. The cracks in our marriage weren't just cracks anymore. They were gaping holes, wide open, impossible to ignore. For the first time, I let myself acknowledge what I had been too afraid to confront. Sarah wasn't just distant. She was betraying me. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I needed more than just a feeling. I needed the truth. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to watch her. The next few weeks were a blur. Sarah continued to talk about Kellen, but now I was listening with different ears. She mentioned him constantly, as if he was some kind of hero in her life. It was subtle, at first, but it was undeniable. Kellen said we should try this for the campaign, she'd tell me, her voice light, as if he was some sort of savior. It became clearer by the day. She wasn't just talking about him, she was relying on him. She was leaning on him, in ways she had once leaned on me. And I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I had to find out the truth. The whole truth. And then, one night it happened. I came face to face with him. Kellen. The man who had stolen my wife's heart. I hadn't expected the encounter. But there he was, standing at the door of my apartment like he owned the place. My jaw tightened as I looked at him, that smug grin plastered on his face, like he knew he had already won. What the hell was he doing in my home? What do you want? I asked, my voice steady, though my fists clenched at my sides. Kellen's smile only widened as he stepped closer, a look of mock sympathy on his face. I thought it was time we had a little talk, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Man to man. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, not moving, not backing down. I could feel my anger rising, but I kept it in check. We don't have anything to talk about, I replied coldly. Oh, I think we do, he smirked, clearly enjoying the power he thought he had. He stepped forward, pushing past me, entering my house without so much as an invitation. You see, Sarah's been struggling lately. She needs someone who understands her. Someone who can give her what she really deserves. And, well, you're in the way. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process it. But one thing was certain. This had gone too far. You think that's you? I asked, barely holding on to the last threads of my composure. I'm just being honest, man, he said, his smug grin widening. Sarah's already made her choice. I'm just here to help you accept it. My mind was racing. This was happening. My worst fears were coming true, but I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand. Not tonight. Not ever. The feeling in the pit of my stomach gnawed at me, a constant, uncomfortable reminder that something wasn't right. I had seen the signs for months: Sarah pulling away, her late nights becoming the new normal, the subtle shift in her behavior. But it wasn't until that night, when I read the email from Kellen, that I finally allowed myself to admit the truth. Something was terribly wrong. I knew it now, deep down, but the part of me that didn't want to face it, my own pride, clung to the belief that this was just a phase, that this would pass. After all, we had been through so much together. We had built a life. We were supposed to be unbreakable. But the cracks were so glaring now, I couldn't ignore them any longer. I had to confront it. I couldn't just sit back and wait for Sarah to come to me. This wasn't something I could keep pretending wasn't happening. I was suffocating in uncertainty. I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand why. So, I made a decision. I would watch her. Every move. Every word. I would find the evidence I needed. Because the truth couldn't be hidden anymore. The next few days were a blur of tension. Every time Sarah walked in the door, a storm of questions raged inside me. Every smile, every offhand comment, every casual remark about her project with Kellen, it all felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I tried to keep it together, I really did. I didn't want to start a fight, didn't want to let the suspicion consume me. But when she said I'm just going out with Kellen and a few others, it felt like I was suffocating. Kellen, again. He had become an ever-present ghost in our relationship, hanging in the background, whispering between the lines. The name alone was enough to make my blood boil. But what could I do? I couldn't just accuse her without knowing for sure. I had to be sure. One evening, after another one of those late office dinners, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until she was upstairs, pretending to get ready for bed, before I made my move. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat louder than the last, as I walked over to her desk. Her phone was sitting there, innocently, like it wasn't the source of the fear and doubt consuming me. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was an invasion of privacy. But at that moment, all I could think about was the gnawing uncertainty that had taken hold of me. Was I crazy? Was I imagining things? Or had I really lost her? My fingers trembled as I picked up her phone. She was always so careful about keeping it locked. But tonight, it was unlocked. My stomach dropped as I swiped the screen. Her messages were the first thing I saw, flirtatious, playful texts from Kellen. My mind raced. My heart felt like it stopped beating for a second. There was no doubt now. She had been lying. These weren't just coworkers. These weren't just late nights filled with work. This was something else entirely. And what hurt the most was that she had hidden it from me. She had kept it all from me. The texts were simple, nothing too explicit. Nothing that could immediately blow up in her face, but they were enough. I miss you already. One read. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. My pulse quickened as I scrolled down further. There was a line that hit me like a punch to the gut. You looked incredible tonight. You always do. When are we going to stop pretending? The words blurred together as my mind raced. Pretending? Were they pretending? Was I the fool? I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. The quiet in the house suddenly became deafening. My breath came in short, sharp bursts as I set her phone down and stood there in the dim light of the living room. I had no idea how long I stood there, my body frozen, mind spinning. I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. How had I not seen this before? How had I been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? But even as the anger began to rise in my chest, I knew I couldn't confront her just yet. Not without more evidence. Not without seeing it for myself. This wasn't a fight I could rush into. If I was going to stand my ground, if I was going to make her see the reality of what had been happening, I needed to be prepared. I needed to be calm. I needed to gather the facts. The following week, I kept my distance, watching her closely. Sarah had no idea. She went about her days, acting like everything was normal, as if nothing had changed. But I was watching. Every glance at her phone, every subtle movement, every change in the way she spoke to me, it all felt like a puzzle I had to piece together. The more I observed, the clearer it became. She was playing a game. A dangerous, reckless game. And the rules had changed. It wasn't just the phone. It wasn't just the texts. It was everything. She'd come home late, always with an excuse. I was out with the team. We had to work through dinner to meet a deadline. It's just one of those late nights. But each excuse felt more hollow than the last. Her eyes avoided mine when she spoke about it. A subtle shift in her demeanor that I hadn't noticed before. The more she tried to hide it, the more obvious it became. There was something going on, something she was trying to protect. And the worst part was that I knew it had nothing to do with work. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep hoping that maybe I was wrong. The pain was unbearable. And every time she spoke about Kellen, the pit in my stomach deepened. The way her eyes sparkled when she mentioned him, there was no mistaking it now. She was drawn to him in a way she'd never been drawn to me. The affection, the admiration, it was all so painfully clear. And I hated it. I needed to confront her, but I couldn't just barge in with accusations. No, I needed something solid. I needed proof. The kind that couldn't be denied. I had to see it with my own eyes. So, I decided to follow her. I had to know for sure. I had to see if this was as real as I thought it was. That afternoon, I decided to follow her to the office. She had mentioned yet another meeting, this time with a new client. It didn't add up. Why was she so secretive about these meetings? Why couldn't she tell me the details? I parked a few blocks away from her office, my heart pounding in my chest, every part of me screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. I had to know. I watched her exit the building at 6 p.m. But she wasn't alone. My stomach twisted as I saw him, a tall, confident figure with his arm wrapped around her waist as they walked together. It wasn't just a friendly gesture. It wasn't just a casual conversation. No, this was intimate. This was more than I could handle. They walked side by side, laughing as if they were the only two people in the world. As they turned the corner toward a nearby restaurant, my legs felt like they were made of stone. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. My hands were clenched into fists, and my whole body was frozen in place, watching my wife, my Sarah, walk away from me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had all the proof I needed. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a fact. Sarah had made her choice. She had betrayed me. And as much as I hated to admit it, it was time to confront her. But I still wasn't ready. Not yet. I had to gather my thoughts. I had to figure out how I would confront her. What would I say? How could I make her understand what she had done? How could I make her see that I wasn't the fool she thought I was? I spent the rest of the night in a haze, replaying everything over and over in my head. And when she finally came home, acting like nothing had happened, I couldn't help but feel disgusted. How could she stand there, pretending like everything was fine? The truth was out now, and there was no going back. She had crossed a line, and the only thing left to do was confront her. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. This was just the beginning. Wait, what happens when you finally confront the man who's been plotting behind your back? Can you really walk away from everything you thought was solid? At this point, everything is hanging by a thread, and what happens next will blow your mind. Do you think he'll finally take control, or is he about to make a fatal mistake? Comment 1. If you think he'll fight back, comment 2. If you think he'll crumble under the pressure. Let's see who's right. The night felt heavier than usual, as if the very air in the house was pressing down on me, thick with the weight of everything I had discovered. I had spent the last few days stewing in the evidence, flirtatious messages from Kellen, that damned email, the late nights, the lies. But still, I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. It wasn't just the affair itself, it was the deception. The calculated way she had kept me in the dark, pretending everything was fine, while she was slipping away. I had been right to follow her that day, to see with my own eyes what was going on. But now the truth was sitting heavily in my gut, gnawing at me. I stood by the window, watching the darkened streets outside. It was late, and Sarah wasn't home yet. I couldn't stop thinking about her and Kellen, about the way they walked down the street together. Their shared laughs, the intimacy between them. How had I missed this? How had I let it get so far? It was hard to reconcile the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built a life with the one I was watching now. A part of me wanted to scream, wanted to charge in and demand answers. But another part of me, one that still cared, one that was still trying to make sense of all of this, was holding back, waiting. I could feel the anger simmering under the surface, but it wasn't just anger. It was hurt. The kind of hurt that cuts deep, that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself, about the person you loved. I had trusted Sarah, completely, without hesitation. And now? Now I was left with nothing but shattered illusions. The life we had built, the promises we had made to each other, they all felt like lies. I didn't know who she was anymore. When she finally walked through the door, I barely looked at her. I couldn't. My chest was tight, my heart racing, and yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I had to think. I had to plan. This wasn't going to be some outburst or impulsive argument. No. I was going to make her see what she had done, to understand the destruction she had caused. The silence between us stretched on, thick and suffocating. And I could tell she felt it too. She had always been good at reading me, but tonight, I don't think she could read me at all. I was an enigma to her. She hung up her coat, tossed her purse on the table, and then paused, looking at me. Her face was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. Was it guilt? Or was it just the act she had perfected so well, the one she used to convince herself that everything was normal? Either way, it didn't matter. Not anymore. I stood up, my body tense, my fists clenched. "Where were you tonight, Sarah?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, but with an edge that I knew she couldn't ignore. She blinked, caught off guard, and for a split second, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a flash of panic, maybe. But it was gone before I could really register it. "Just another late night at the office," she said, too casually, the words falling from her lips like they were rehearsed. "You know how it is. We're working on a big campaign, and deadlines are tight." I couldn't keep it in anymore. "Don't lie to me, Sarah." The words came out like a roar, cutting through the silence. "I know about Kellen. I know what's been going on between you two." The shock on her face was almost comical, like she hadn't expected me to know. But the truth was, I had known for longer than she thought. It wasn't just the obvious signs, the late nights. The changed behavior, it was the way she acted when she talked about him. The way her eyes lit up when she mentioned his name. It wasn't something I could ignore anymore. Her face paled, and for a moment, she didn't speak. The silence between us was thick now, almost suffocating. I could see her mind working, trying to find the right words to say, but I wasn't giving her that chance. "Not tonight. Not anymore. Please, Finn, she started, but I interrupted her, my voice cold and cutting. "No. Don't try to justify it. I'm done with the excuses. Sarah. You've been lying to me. To my face. For months now. And I'm done pretending like this is okay." My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed through it. The truth was ugly, but it was necessary. I had to face it, even if it tore me apart. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't soften. I couldn't. Not now. Not when everything was falling apart around me. She took a step toward me, but I didn't move. "Finn, please. I never meant for this to happen. I was just what?" I shot back, stepping closer, my chest tightening with every word. "Just bored? Just tired of me? What? I gave you everything, Sarah. I was there for you. I was your rock. And you." I shook my head, my voice breaking. "You betrayed me. And not just once, but over and over again. You chose him. You chose Kellen. And you let me sit here, pretending everything was fine. Pretending that I was the one who was crazy." She stumbled back, tears streaming down her face now. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear I didn't." But her words were hollow now. The truth was clear, and no amount of apologies was going to change it. "You hurt me every day, Sarah," I whispered, the anger slowly draining out of me. "Every time you lied, every time you pulled away, every time you let him get closer. You hurt me." I could feel the tears building up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to let her see how much this was killing me. "And now you want me to forgive you? To just forget everything?" Her hands trembled as she reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, Sarah. I can't do that. Not anymore." I could see the realization hitting her, the weight of what had happened finally sinking in. She knew. She knew it was over. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, both of us trapped in this awful, painful silence. There were no more words left to say. No more justifications. No more promises. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. She had made her choice. And I had made mine. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live like this. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to let her go. Let the life we had built together slip through my fingers, because in the end, I had to choose me. I had to choose my own peace, my own dignity, and she had to face the consequences of her actions. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick, but I was done. This was the moment I had to take control, and nothing was going to stop me. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, suffocating tension. The house, once a place of warmth and familiarity, now felt foreign, as though the walls themselves could sense the chasm growing between Sarah and me. Every time she entered the room, I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting for something, an apology, an explanation, maybe even some glimmer of hope. But I couldn't give her that. I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. It was late one evening when I finally decided to confront the full extent of the damage. Sarah had been avoiding me, hiding behind her work, behind the lie that everything was fine. But I couldn't ignore the reality anymore. I needed closure, and I needed it now. She had broken something inside me, and no matter how much she tried to convince me otherwise, I couldn't forgive her for that. Not yet, and maybe not ever. She came home late again, her heels clicking against the wooden floor as she entered the living room. The same excuse: work, deadlines, the usual. She was trying to act like nothing had changed, like the pieces of our marriage hadn't been scattered all over the floor, waiting to be put back together. But I knew better now. I could see through the act. And as much as it pained me to admit it, I didn't want to pretend anymore either. I was done. "Where's the real you, Sarah?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "Where's the woman I married? The one I trusted? The one who used to look at me like I was the only person in the room?" Her expression faltered for a brief second, and I could see the guilt flash in her eyes. It was the first time I had seen that look in a long time, and it made my stomach turn. The woman who had once been my partner, my equal, was now someone I barely recognized. "Finn, she started, but I wasn't interested in her explanations anymore. Not in the half-hearted apologies she would throw my way like they were supposed to fix everything. "No." I cut her off, stepping closer. "You don't get to apologize anymore. You don't get to tell me how sorry you are, how it wasn't supposed to happen. You made a choice, Sarah. You chose him. And while you were out there with him, with Kellen, I was here waiting for you to come home, hoping you'd snap out of it, hoping I was wrong." My voice cracked slightly, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wouldn't break down. Not now. Not after everything. Her face was a mixture of hurt and confusion, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with. But it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. The truth was undeniable, and it was too late for her to hide behind false apologies now. "I never meant to hurt you, Finn," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen. You know how much I love you." The words sounded rehearsed, hollow. I had heard them before too many times before, and each time, they rang more and more empty. "You love me," I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "If you loved me, Sarah, you wouldn't have let this go on for so long. You wouldn't have kept it from me. From the man who stood by your side through everything. You wouldn't have made me feel like a damn fool." She stepped forward, reaching out to me, but I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The hurt was still there, raw and fresh, and I couldn't let her touch me, not when everything felt like it was falling apart. "I never wanted this," she insisted, her voice thick with emotion. "I swear, Finn, it wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't mean to." "Stop." I couldn't listen anymore. I didn't want to hear her try to explain away what had happened. I couldn't keep doing this. "You think I don't know what's been going on? That I haven't seen the way you look at him? The way you talk about him?" I shook my head in disbelief. "It's not just the affair, Sarah. It's the lies. The way you've made me question everything. I trusted you. I believed in you. And you destroyed that." Her eyes welled with tears, and for a moment, I could almost feel the pull of sympathy, of old memories resurfacing. But I couldn't let that be the thing that kept me trapped in this toxic cycle. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. She had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. "I don't even recognize you anymore," I said softly, my voice tinged with sorrow. "I don't know who you are, or who you've become. But the woman I married, the woman I loved, she's gone." The silence between us was deafening. We both stood there, two strangers in the same room, both lost in the wreckage of a life we had built and destroyed. And in that silence, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about everything. It was about the trust she had shattered, the future she had stolen, the love she had left to wither. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah," I whispered, the words barely audible as they left my lips. "I can't keep fighting for something that you've already given up on. I deserve more than this. I deserve to be with someone who actually wants to be with me." Her face crumpled, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real remorse. But it didn't matter, not anymore. I had reached my breaking point, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back into this toxic mess. I couldn't. "I'm done," I said, each word final, each word sealing the fate of our marriage. She sank to her knees. her tears flowing freely now. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't let myself go back to that place of false hope. I had given everything, and now there was nothing left to give. Please, she begged, her voice a mere whisper. Finn, please don't do this. But it was too late. I had already made my decision. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It wasn't about saving the marriage. It was about taking back control of my life, about finding a way to heal, and about learning to love myself again. I had spent too long waiting for her to come around, for her to realize the pain she had caused. But now, I knew the truth. It was time for me to move on. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there on her knees, in the shattered remains of what we once were. And as I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the peace I had hoped for, it wasn't the resolution I had wanted, but it was the peace of knowing I was finally free. Free from the lies, free from the hurt, and free from a love that had long since faded. And as I stepped into the night, the cool air filling my lungs, I realized something important. I was no longer the man I had been. The man who had been afraid to let go. The man who had tried to fix what was already broken. I was someone new, someone stronger, and that, at least, was something worth holding on to. The days after that confrontation were a blur of anger and disbelief. I thought I had reached my breaking point, but each passing day seemed to test me even further. Every time Sarah walked into the room, her presence felt like a weight pressing on my chest, suffocating me with memories of everything we had shared, and everything she had destroyed. Her apologies had become nothing more than empty words, each one falling on deaf ears. Each one making it harder to believe that the woman standing in front of me was the same person I had fallen in love with. She had betrayed me, and now, nothing felt real anymore. The silence between us grew unbearable. I kept my distance, retreating into myself, trying to make sense of the chaos she had caused in my life. But no matter how hard I tried to push her out of my thoughts, the image of her and Kellen kept haunting me. I couldn't escape it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together laughing, touching, living in a world where I didn't belong. I had tried to be patient, tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but now, all I could feel was a deep, burning betrayal that seemed to have no end. Sarah, for her part, seemed to be trying. She would reach out, her hand trembling as she touched my arm, her voice laced with desperation. Finn, please, she would say, I love you. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But the more she tried, the more I pulled away. I couldn't let her in. Not anymore. She had crossed a line I couldn't forgive, and no amount of apologies could erase the damage she had done. I needed to be strong, needed to find the strength to walk away from the woman I had shared everything with. And then came the moment that broke me. It was a Thursday night, when everything came to a head. I had been spending the evening at home, going through some old files, trying to distract myself from the nagging thoughts that kept swirling around in my head. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time in days, I actually felt like I was breathing again. But then, the doorbell rang. I froze. My heart began to pound in my chest, as I slowly stood up and made my way to the front door. I didn't know who it could be. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I wasn't prepared for the sight that greeted me. There he was, Kellen, standing on my doorstep, his smug grin plastered across his face, as if he owned the place. What the hell are you doing here? I demanded, my voice low and dangerous, my fists clenched at my sides. He didn't even flinch. In fact, he stepped forward, as if daring me to make a move. His arrogance was unbearable, and in that moment, I saw him for what he truly was, nothing more than a coward hiding behind the destruction he had caused. I thought it was time we had a little chat, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Man to man, I didn't move, I couldn't. My body was frozen in place, caught between the desire to throw him out and the urge to make him understand the magnitude of what he had done. But I couldn't. Not yet. Get out of my house, I growled, my voice cold and steady. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, not after everything he had stolen from me. But Kellen wasn't done. Oh, I think we need to talk, Finn. You see, Sarah's been struggling lately, he continued, his words dripping with false sympathy. She needs someone who understands her, someone who can give her what she really deserves. And you're You're just in the way. His words cut through me like a knife. How dare he stand there, acting like he had some kind of claim on her? How dare he come into my home and talk to me like I was the one who had betrayed everything we had built? I felt the rage bubbling up inside me, but I fought to keep it under control. I wouldn't let him see how much his words were affecting me. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. You think that's you? I spat, stepping closer, my voice dangerously quiet. You think you're the one who deserves her? You're nothing but a manipulative little worm who preys on people's pain. You don't deserve anything, least of all her. He stepped back slightly, clearly surprised by the venom in my words. But the smug smile never left his face. I'm just being honest, Finn. It's time to step aside. Sarah's already made her choice, and the sooner you accept that, the easier it will be for both of us. My hands were shaking now, my anger threatening to boil over, but I kept my voice steady. You don't know a damn thing about her, Kellen. You don't know what we had, what we built together. You don't get to come here and tell me what I need to do. I'm the one who decides how this ends, not you. He chuckled, the sound low and condescending. We'll see about that, he muttered, stepping past me and into the house as if he had every right to be there. I'm not here to fight, Finn. I'm just here to make you understand that it's over. She's with me now. You're holding on to something that's already gone. I wanted to fight him, wanted to scream at him, throw him out of my house, but something inside me told me to stay calm. I had to keep control. I couldn't let him get under my skin. Not now. You're wrong, I said, my voice cold as ice. You think you can just walk into my life and take what you want? You think you can just waltz in here, talk to me like you own everything, and walk away with my life? No, Kellen. That's not how this is going to work. His smile faltered for a moment, but it quickly returned. You'll get over it, he said dismissively. Sarah and I will be happy, and you'll learn to accept it. Just let it go. No, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm not letting it go. Not now. Not ever. I'm not going to let you walk away with my wife, my life, without a fight. The words hung in the air between us, and for the first time, Kellen's arrogance cracked. He knew I meant it. He knew I wasn't going to let him take what he wanted without consequence. I'm done with you, I muttered. Now get out of my house. And don't ever come back. Kellen's face twisted with frustration, but he didn't say another word. He turned, storming out of the house, his footsteps loud in the silence that followed. I stood there, my heart pounding, my chest heaving with a mixture of relief and anger. But even as the door slammed shut behind him, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had taken a step toward reclaiming my life. But the real battle was just beginning. And no matter what happened next, I was ready to face it. I wouldn't let him win, not this time. The following days after Kellen's confrontation felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I understood about my life. I had expected things to be clearer, more definitive after standing up to him. But instead, I found myself trapped in a whirlwind of unresolved emotions, all tangled up in a single, inescapable truth. The life I once knew, the life I had built with Sarah, was shattered. She had broken something inside me, something irreplaceable. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't put the pieces back together. I had made my decision that night. I had told Kellen exactly where he stood outside my life, outside my marriage, and that felt good, even liberating for a moment. But when the silence settled in, when Sarah was in the other room pretending that nothing had changed, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not really. I had confronted Kellen, but now, I had to confront the one person who mattered most. The one person who had destroyed me without ever thinking twice about it, Sarah. For days, I kept my distance. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to hear her voice, hear the excuses she had prepared. I couldn't stomach the thought of hearing her tell me how sorry she was again, how it was all a mistake. I didn't care about her apologies. I didn't care about the reasons behind her betrayal anymore. What I cared about was the damage. What I cared about was the life that had been stolen from me, piece by piece. The pieces that I wasn't sure I could ever get back. But even though I kept my distance, Sarah's presence lingered in the house like a toxic cloud. Her every move seemed to remind me of what had been lost, what I could never have again. And then, one night, the inevitable happened. She came to me. It was late, later than usual. I had been sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, trying to distract myself from the storm of thoughts that constantly circled in my mind. When she walked in, I barely looked up. I couldn't. I had heard her footsteps, heard the hesitation in her approach, and I knew what was coming. The same damn apology, the same broken words that had no meaning anymore. But she didn't speak at first. She just stood there, watching me. And in that moment, I felt it, the weight of everything between us. The years we had spent together, the love that had once been so pure, now gone, now twisted beyond recognition. "Finn," she whispered, her voice soft, fragile. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. I just kept staring ahead, focusing on the flickering screen in front of me. She was testing me, I knew, testing my resolve, trying to get me to let my guard down just enough for her to slip through. But I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. Finally, I turned my head slowly to look at her, and what I saw almost made me flinch. The woman I had loved, the woman who had been my partner, was standing there, broken. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale, and she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. She looked lost. I hated that I still cared. I hated that part of me wanted to comfort her, wanted to go back to when things were simple. But I couldn't. I couldn't forget what she had done. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. But I couldn't soften it. Not now. Her voice cracked when she spoke. I don't know what happened. I don't know how we got here." The words were like daggers. She didn't know. Of course, she didn't. She never had to see it the way I had. She never had to stand there, day after day, watching her life with me crumble to dust, while she played pretend with someone else. I wanted to scream at her, to make her feel the weight of everything she had done to me, to us. But I didn't. I just stared at her, trying to keep the tears from welling up in my eyes. "You don't know," I repeated, my voice barely audible. "You don't know how we got here? You've been lying to me for months, Sarah. Lying to my face while you were out there with him, with Kellen. And you have the nerve to tell me you don't know how we got here?" My hands were shaking now, but I kept them at my sides, fighting the urge to lash out. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice desperate. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you." The words hit me harder than I expected, and for a second, I almost believed her. Almost. But then I remembered everything. I remembered the late nights, the secret meetings, the way she had looked at him, the way she had pulled away from me. I remembered how, for months, I had been trying to convince myself that I wasn't being paranoid, that there wasn't something going on behind my back. But there was. And no amount of tears could erase that. "You already lost me, Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper now. "You lost me the moment you decided to lie. The moment you decided that Kellen was more important than me. More important than us." Her eyes widened, and she took a step forward, reaching for me, but I pulled away, my heart breaking as I did it. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to touch me. Not after everything." She sank to her knees in front of me, the tears streaming down her face now, her body shaking with sobs. "I love you, Finn. Please, don't leave me. Please don't do this." But her words didn't move me, not anymore. They were just another way for her to hold on to something she had already destroyed. I could feel the anger and the sorrow welling up inside me, mixing together in a storm. I didn't know how to control. But the one thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't keep fighting for something that wasn't there anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. "I'm done, Sarah," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my lips. "I can't keep doing this. I'm done pretending like you didn't break my heart. Like you didn't destroy everything we had." She looked up at me, pleading with her eyes, but I couldn't give in. I couldn't be the person who let her off the hook. Not anymore. "I can't forgive you," I said softly, but with finality. "I won't." The silence between us felt like an eternity. I stood there, my body trembling with the weight of it all, and I watched her fall apart in front of me. But even in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to walk away. I had to walk away from her, from the life we had, and from everything I thought I knew. And as I turned to leave, I realized something. I wasn't just walking away from her. I was walking away from the person I had been. The person who had been willing to forgive, to hold on for the sake of love. That person was gone. And what was left was someone stronger. Someone who wasn't afraid to let go. And that was the only victory I could claim. The days that followed felt like a slow march into the unknown. Every step I took felt heavy, each one carrying the weight of everything that had happened. After that final confrontation with Sarah, after telling her I was done, I thought I would feel relief. Like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But I didn't. I felt empty. Like a part of me had been ripped out, and I wasn't sure how to fill the void. I spent my nights sleepless, tossing and turning in the bed that no longer felt like mine. The echoes of the life I had shared with Sarah haunted me, the moments we had once shared. Now nothing but painful reminders of what could have been. I had made the decision to move on, to rebuild. But rebuilding was never as simple as it sounded. It wasn't just about walking away from Sarah. It was about walking away from everything I had thought was real. Everything I had invested in. Everything that had once felt safe and certain. And that was the hardest part. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the shattering of the image I had held of our future together. The house we had built. The plans for the future. The love that we once shared. All of it turned to dust in my hands. There were moments, fleeting moments, when I felt like I was finally free. Like I could breathe again. But then the memories would creep in, uninvited and unrelenting. And with them, came the questions I didn't have answers to. Questions that I was afraid to ask. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind? Was I just a fool, believing in something that was never real? But there was no time for self-pity. I couldn't afford to get lost in those questions. I had a life to reclaim, and I wasn't going to waste any more time wondering about the past. The past was gone, and all I had was the present. I had started to distance myself from everyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone about what had happened. I didn't want to hear their advice or their opinions. I didn't want anyone to tell me how I should feel, how I should move on, how I should forgive. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to move on yet. And I certainly didn't know how to forgive. The wound was still fresh, still bleeding, and I wasn't sure it ever would stop. But as the days passed, something inside me began to shift. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they started to lose their grip on me. Not because they were gone, but because I refused to let them control me. I was tired of being consumed by this pain. I was tired of letting Sarah and Kellen, and everything that had happened define me. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was still me. I was still Finn. And it was time I remembered who that was. I started doing things for myself. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned. Things I had once loved but had let slip away in the chaos of my marriage. I went for long runs in the mornings, letting the cold air hit my face and the rhythm of my feet on the pavement clear my mind. I spent time with friends, people I had pushed away when things had gotten tough. I reconnected with parts of myself that I had lost. And slowly, painfully, I began to feel like myself again. But even as I was healing, there was a constant reminder that Sarah hadn't disappeared from my life. She was still out there, still a part of the world I was trying to leave behind. I couldn't escape her. And then, one evening, the phone rang. It was her. My heart stopped for a moment, and I felt a cold rush of panic flood through me. I hadn't spoken to her since that night. Hadn't heard her voice since I'd walked away from the life we'd built. I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the answer button, unsure if I should pick it up. Part of me wanted to ignore it, wanted to keep moving forward without looking back. But another part of me, one that had been fighting to keep its composure, wanted answers. I wasn't ready to hear them, but I needed to know. I needed to hear her say what she had to say. I pressed the button. Finn. Her voice cracked, and I immediately knew she had been crying. It was the same voice I had heard 1,000 times before. The voice I had once trusted with my whole heart. But this time, it sounded different. There was a tremor in her words, a vulnerability that I hadn't expected. "Why are you calling me, Sarah?" I asked, my voice rough, but steady. I had been prepared for this. I had told myself I wouldn't let her manipulate me again, that I wouldn't fall for the same tricks. I don't know what to say, she said, her voice trembling. "I just needed to hear your voice. I need to explain, to apologize. Finn, I'm so sorry for everything. I've ruined everything, and I don't know how to fix it." I felt the anger bubbling up inside me, but I kept it in check. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into feeling sorry for her. "You can't fix it, Sarah. You can't undo what you've done. You can't erase the damage. And you can't expect me to just forgive you and forget. Her silence was deafening, and for a moment, I thought she had hung up. But then she spoke again, softer this time. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I am truly sorry. I was lost, Finn. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how much I was hurting you until it was too late. The words hit me harder than I expected. But even as I felt the tears threatening to rise, I couldn't let them. I couldn't let her see how much her words still affected me. I don't need your apology, Sarah. What I needed was your honesty. What I needed was for you to choose me, to choose us. But you didn't. You chose him. I could hear her sobbing now, and it felt like a knife to my chest. But I stood firm. I had to. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living in the past. You broke me, and I'm not sure I can ever go back to who I was before. I don't expect you to, she whispered, her voice full of regret. But I hope, one day, you can forgive me. Even if it's just for your own peace. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the flood of emotions that were threatening to overwhelm me. But when I spoke again, I spoke with certainty. Goodbye, Sarah. I hope you find what you're looking for. But I can't be a part of it anymore. And with that, I hung up the phone. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The night after I hung up the phone felt strangely quiet. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting for something to happen, for something to change. But nothing did. The weight of the conversation, of everything that had happened, hung in the air like a fog that refused to lift. I was numb, unsure of what to feel next. I had taken the step to move on, to walk away from Sarah and the life we had built. But now that I had done it, I didn't feel the victory I had expected. Instead, I felt hollow, like a part of me had been ripped out and discarded. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about the years I had spent believing in something that wasn't real. It was about the trust I had placed in someone who had turned my life into a lie. The betrayal hurt, but the realization that everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, was built on sand that was what really stung. The love I had once felt for Sarah felt distant now, a memory I wasn't sure was even mine anymore. But I couldn't stay lost in the past. I couldn't let the lies define me. I had already made the decision to walk away, to leave Sarah behind, but there was something inside me that couldn't fully let go. I kept coming back to the question of whether it was all worth it, the love, the pain, the heartbreak. Was it worth all the years spent building something, just to watch it crumble in an instant? And in the silence of my thoughts, I found the answer I had been avoiding. No, it wasn't. As the days went by, I tried to fill the void with distractions. I spent time with friends, people who knew me before Sarah, people who could remind me of who I used to be. I threw myself into my work, into the projects I had put on the back burner for far too long. I started running again, just like I had in the early days of our relationship, early morning jogs through the park. The cool air biting at my face, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement, like a cleansing ritual. It wasn't enough, though. I wasn't ready to let go of everything I had been through. The pain, the anger, it kept coming back in waves, threatening to drown me. It wasn't until a week later that I realized something was shifting inside me. It wasn't a grand revelation, but rather a small, quiet change. I was starting to heal. Slowly. Unevenly. But it was happening. The thoughts of Sarah, the memories of our time together, started to lose their grip on me. For the first time in a long while, I began to breathe without feeling like I was suffocating. The weight of her betrayal was still there, still gnawing at me, but it no longer consumed me. I was beginning to see that I was more than what I had been in that marriage. I was still Finn Hayes, a man who had a future outside of the pain Sarah had caused. And then, just when I thought I had gained some control, the doorbell rang. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. It was later than usual, and I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it, letting the silence take over again. But something inside me urged me to open the door. When I did, my breath caught in my chest. There, standing in front of me, was Sarah. I hadn't seen her in days, and the sight of her now standing there, looking just as lost and broken as I had felt, sent a shock through my body. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, and she looked so small, so fragile, that for a moment, I almost reached out to her. But I stopped myself. I couldn't do it. Not after everything. Finn. She whispered, her voice barely audible. She took a step forward, her hands trembling at her sides, but I didn't move. I couldn't move. The anger and betrayal surged up inside me, choking me. I couldn't be the man she wanted me to be anymore. I couldn't let her back into my life. "Why are you here, Sarah?" I asked, my voice cold and steady, though my hands were shaking. I didn't know if I was angry, hurt, or just numb anymore. But I knew I had to stand my ground. I couldn't let her destroy me again. I needed to see you, she said, her voice cracking. She wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept coming. "I'm sorry, Finn. I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I wanted to tell her to leave. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had taken from me. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at her, listening to the sound of my own breathing, steady and measured, as if trying to convince myself that I was in control. But the truth was, I wasn't. "Do you know what you've done to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The words came out, raw and jagged, as though they were tearing at my throat. "You destroyed everything, Sarah. You took my trust and shattered it. You took my love and threw it away." Her face crumpled, and she took a step back, almost as though my words had physically hurt her. "I never meant to hurt you," she said again, her voice desperate. "I never meant to fall for him. I didn't want this to happen. But it did, Finn. And I've spent every day since regretting it. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't, I know that. But I need you to know how sorry I am." For a moment, I almost believed her. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret, the guilt. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. I had given her everything, and she had betrayed me. There was no coming back from that. "I don't know how to forgive you, Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse, as if saying the words aloud made them even harder to bear. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Her face crumpled even more, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. "Please, Finn," she whispered, her hands reaching out to me, but I stepped back. "Please don't give up on me. I love you. I've always loved you." I didn't move. I couldn't. "It's over, Sarah," I said softly, the finality in my words hanging in the air between us. "I can't keep fighting for something that's already gone." She stared at me, her tears flowing freely now, and I felt a strange sense of closure wash over me. I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't hurt, I was just done. Done with the lies, done with the betrayal, done with the woman I once loved. And as she turned and walked away, I realized that I wasn't walking away from her. I was walking away from the past. I was walking away from a life that no longer served me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. The days following Sarah's departure felt like both an end and a beginning, a paradox I couldn't fully grasp. I had closed the door on the past on her, on the shattered life we had built together, but I wasn't sure what lay beyond that door. It was like stepping into a void, a space where everything familiar no longer fit, where everything I had relied on to define me was no longer solid. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I wasn't sure who I could be. All I knew was that I had to move forward, even if I didn't know where I was headed. For the first time in years, the silence in the house wasn't filled with false hopes or desperate attempts at reconciliation. It was just quiet, peaceful, even, in its own way. But the silence was also deafening. There was nothing to distract me from the thoughts that kept creeping into my mind, the questions I still hadn't answered, the emotions I had yet to confront. Every step I took away from Sarah, away from that life, felt like a step into the unknown. I spent my days trying to rebuild some semblance of routine. I threw myself into work, into the projects I had neglected for so long, just to keep my mind occupied. It was supposed to help, right? But even as I stayed busy, there was a gnawing emptiness inside me. I had spent so many years building my identity around Sarah, around the idea of us, that now, without her, I wasn't sure who I was. I wasn't just dealing with the aftermath of betrayal. I was dealing with the loss of an entire future I'd believed in. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, people I hadn't seen since before my life with Sarah had consumed me. There were moments, brief flashes of normalcy, where I felt like I was getting back to who I had been. But those moments were always fleeting. No matter how much I tried to fill the void, no matter how many distractions I surrounded myself with, I was left with the haunting reality that I had been deceived. And I had let it happen. I had let myself believe in a lie for so long that I didn't even know where the truth started and ended. It wasn't until a month later, when I ran into an old acquaintance at a coffee shop, that I began to see a glimmer of hope. I was sitting at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee, when she walked in. Kate. We had known each other for years, college friends who had drifted apart as I fell deeper into my marriage with Sarah. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room. And for a moment, I thought she wouldn't even recognize me. But then, her gaze landed on me, and the surprise was clear on her face. "Finn?" she asked, her voice filled with cautious disbelief. I stood up, forcing a smile. "Kate, hey. It's been a while." She walked over, and we exchanged a quick hug before sitting down. She was still the same kind, easygoing, with an energy that seemed to ground me instantly. We started talking, just catching up on life, but the conversation soon turned to more personal matters. She asked about Sarah, about how things had been going for me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of release. Talking about it, talking about my life, my pain, it didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. It felt healing. "Things are different," I said, my voice low as I leaned back in my chair. "But I'm learning to move on." Kate smiled softly, sensing the weight of my words. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy, Finn. I know it's been tough, but you've got a lot of life ahead of you." I stared at her, at the ease with which she spoke, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of everything. Maybe there was something more waiting for me out there, something beyond the heartbreak, beyond the pain of betrayal. But the path forward wasn't going to be easy. I still had a long way to go before I could fully heal. I had spent so long living in the shadow of what I thought was a perfect life, that now I was left to rebuild everything. And it wasn't just about finding someone else, or filling the empty space Sarah had left. It was about rediscovering who I was without her. It was about becoming the person I had forgotten in the years of our marriage. As the weeks passed, I focused on myself more. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't need to. I learned to enjoy the small things again, the feeling of the wind on my face during my morning runs, the satisfaction of a good day's work, the laughter of friends who cared about me. For the first time in months, I began to feel a sense of control again, a sense of self that had been stripped away in the wreckage of my relationship with Sarah. I wasn't ready to jump back into dating. I wasn't ready for anything serious. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was completely alone in the world. One evening, several months after Sarah had left, I found myself sitting on the porch of my new apartment, a bottle of beer in my hand, looking out at the city lights. The cool air brushed against my face, and I let out a long breath, trying to absorb everything I had been through. The pain, the loss, the betrayal, they were still there, but they didn't control me anymore. I had learned to live with them, to accept them as part of my journey. That was when I realized that I wasn't just healing. I was transforming. I had survived the worst of it, the shock, the pain, the confusion. And now, I was standing on the other side. I was no longer the man who had been crushed by Sarah's lies. I was a man who had fought to reclaim his life, his dignity, and his sense of self. I was a man who had found strength in the midst of weakness. And that strength would carry me forward into whatever came next. And then, just as I was about to take another sip of my beer, my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, half expecting it to be some reminder I had set for myself. But when I saw the name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of everything we had been through settling back on my shoulders. But then, I pressed the button and answered. "Finn," she said, her voice quiet and tentative. "I've been thinking about everything. About us. And I just wanted to say that. I'm sorry. I know it's too late for us, but I hope you're doing okay." I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to say something harsh, to remind her of everything she had done, to make her feel the weight of her actions. But instead, I just took a deep breath, letting the tension leave my body. "I'm okay, Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "I'm doing better than I was, and I've learned a lot. About life. About myself. About who I want to be." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. "I hope you find happiness, Finn. I really do." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you. I hope you find it too." And with that, I hung up. The call ended, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a new beginning. Not for us, but for me. For the first time, I realized that I had made it through. I had fought my way out of the darkness, and now, I was stepping into the light. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready for whatever came next. I was free. You won't believe how this one ends. The final confrontation is coming, and it's not what anyone expects. Will the man get his revenge, or will everything he's been fighting for fall apart? The shocking twist will have you questioning everything. Don't miss the final reveal. Do you think he'll walk away victorious? Or will he regret his decisions forever? Comment your thoughts below. Who do you think really won? And don't forget to hit that like button if you were on the edge of your seat this entire time. The story teaches us that even in the face of deep betrayal and heartbreak, we have the power to rebuild our lives. It's easy to get lost in the past, to cling to what we thought was real, but true strength lies in moving forward. We must not let others define our worth or happiness. Take control of your own path, focus on personal growth, healing, and reclaiming what's rightfully yours. Life doesn't stop after hardship. It's about learning from the pain, embracing change, and ultimately finding peace. Don't wait for others to fix you. The power to heal lies within yourself.